ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So we're continuing on with Agamas and South Indian Vaishnavism. Let's have a look. I think we're on page 319. So we just got finished talking about, this is in a chapter about Agamas and other Sri Vaishnava literature. So we just got finished talking about Pila Lokacharya Sri Vachana Bhushanam. Now, he also wrote a book called Mamukshapadi. So we're going to talk about Mamukshapadi here. These are both Rahasya Granthas, which have to do with the meanings of the mantras which are given at Panchasamskaram for Sri Vaishnavas. So they have to do with property and they have to do with Sharanagati and Moksha. So in still another word, Mamukshapadi, the author, Pila Lokacharya, discusses the import of the three mantras, studying the meaning and significance of each syllable. The place of Sri, her acting as the mediatrix. Remember we said Purushakara, she's the mediator between the souls and the Supreme Lord Srimanarayana. And the Charma Sloka being applicable, meaning the Krishna Charma Sloka, although there's Rama Charma Sloka, Vraha Charma Sloka, there's some other Charma Slokas, but the Krishna Charma Sloka, Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarvadhamam Paritijamamikam Sharam Bhaja Aham Tva Sarva Pape Bhyo Mokshishami Masucha, which is the final instruction of Lord Krishna, being applicable only to the Vibhava, get fully explained. Okay, so while upholding the view that God himself would bless the self, the author states that what is enjoined as karma comes under service. So if you think of doing karma or karma yoga, actually it becomes kainkarya for the Sri Vaishnava. The Sri Vaishnava's kainkarya or service to the Lord. As a servant or a slave of the Lord, we do that kainkarya without any service without any expectation of return. And the jnana or jnana yoga under the knowledge of the self, and bhakti as bhakti under the earnest desire to be reunited with God in loving service in Sri Vaikuntham, and as property or surrender under the correct knowledge of God. So amongst his other works, the Artha Panchaka, which means 5 arthas or 5 meanings, right, which categorizes many subjects in terms 5, discusses the 5 subjects which a Vaishnava should know before he seeks God's grace. They are the nature of Brahman, the nature of self, the means of attaining him, the nature of moksha, and the obstacles that lie in the way of getting to it. This is very similar to the way the Brahma Sutras are set up, because the Brahma Sutras are in 4 chapters. The first chapter is what is Brahman. The second chapter is what is not Brahman. The third chapter is basically what is liberation or what is moksha, and the final chapter is whatever is stopping us from getting to moksha. So how to get to moksha in third chapter, and what is stopping us from reaching moksha. So he's divided into 5. The knowledge of God, the knowledge of the self, the means to attain him. So the first 2 are what we call tattva. It's the means of attaining him, which is called hita, the nature of moksha, which is purushartha, right? And then the obstacles are called virodhi, or things that stand in the way of getting to liberation. So in the Tattva Shekara, which is another work by Pila Lokacharya, he states that property is the means of getting rid of bondage. Property is also called Nyasa, Tyaga, Nikshepa, or Sharanagati, right? And remember, we also called it in the Upanishads, it's called Nyasa Vidya, right? One of the 32 Upanishadic Vidyas or systems in the Upanishads. And by other names. So it's known by many different names. Surrendering oneself to Paramatman, the super soul or supreme soul, is to be carried out, and all are eligible for it, right? Everybody is qualified for doing Sharanagati or property. It is a particular kind of knowledge that arises in the self. It's a realization. Property is really a realization that you are a slave of God, basically. It's a realization of your real true nature of the soul, of the self. So this knowledge includes, number one, request, which is formed through stopping the transgressions of God's commands. Number two, God being favorably disposed. And three, meditation by the self on God's omnipotence. This knowledge has two phases. One in the form of the object, namely God's becoming the means without the self's request for it. And the other, the cognition in the form of the resolve or vow of the self. Those who are qualified for this must have the earnestness to attain the Supreme Being, absence of the desire for anything else, and determined conviction in God's liberality and other qualities. That the self has nothing to call as its own determines this knowledge. So, in a work called Tani Dvaya, the author, again Pilalokacharya, notes that among the means of getting moksha, property is the best. He cites instances from the Vedas, Itihasas, and Puranas to justify this unique position of property. It is defined as knowledge in the form of a request stating that the self is an abode of offenses and has nothing and is helpless, and that he alone, meaning the Supreme Lord, Srimad Narayana, alone must be the means of moksha for him, for the self. It is also defined as a request being the only means for obtaining one's aim, which could not be achieved by any other means. And this request must be made with a belief, right? So, with a belief here, with something belief. I don't know what that is. Even my printed text has it wrong printing there. With something belief, anyway. So the six constituents which are said to belong to property are stated by the author as the traits which the self would get after becoming a prapana, right? So there's a sloka which comes from Lakshmi Tantra, and it may also be found in Ahiribudnya Samhita. Both of these we've heard about, Pancharatra Agamas, which gives a definition of property or Sharanagati, right? And it says, Anukulyasya Sankalpa, Pratikulyasya Varjana, etc. And there are 5 or 6 things written in that sloka, which are considered to be the angas or the limbs of property or Sharanagati, the sections or how property is divided up. Now, these things, these limbs of property, right? There's a little bit of a difference in the understanding between the Vadagalais and Tengalais on this, right? The Vadagalais say you have to have these qualifications, that you are kampanya, completely helpless, and you are depending on God to save you, and you have faith in Him, and etc. All these things, right? The Tengalais say, as he just said here, that because Pilalokacharya is like an acharya for the Tengalais, he says that these traits will come about after you surrender to God. So somebody sees them as prerequisites, the Vadagalais, and other people see them as postrequisites. In any case, they are both requisite for property. The Alwars are said to have adopted property, right, when they got the tattva jnana, the knowledge of reality, through God's unconditional grace. So God bestowed His unconditional grace upon the Alwars, and when they got that knowledge, right, then they adopted the system of property or surrender. And they did so because they could not brook any delay in attaining Him. They wanted to attain the intimate divine service of the Lord in Sri Vaikuntham as soon as they could. So a prapana has nothing to do. He has nothing to gain here in this life, and so gets moksha when he gives up this body. The great Vaishnavacharyas have preferred property as the only means for all, since it destroys all the accumulated sins of the selves. Since everyone is authorized to adopt it, and since moksha is assured at the end of the present life. So it's a very good system. The best system. The self has really no power over its own protection, and the protector, namely God, has a right to protect the self and will protect the self. Remember, the example was given of the children and the parents. So if the children pray to the parents to protect them, it's a natural duty of the parents or the father to protect the children, right? And so this, we don't have to pray because he's naturally going to look after his property, his servants. Shri is considered only as a mediatrix, right? As an intermediary, as a mediator, which is called Purushakara in Sanskrit, and not as an upaya, not as the actual means to liberation. She is not the actual means to liberation. Neither the guru, nor the acharya, or nor Goddess Lakshmi, Mahalakshmi are considered, especially by the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas, to be actually the means of liberation, right? Or the goal, right? However, in liberation, one would also serve Mahalakshmi and Sriman Narayana. Just like if you became a servant of a household, if you were engaged as a servant by the head of the household, the husband or the father, right? Then you would also serve the lady of the house, the housewife, right? Which means Mahalakshmi, the consort. So therefore, she is not equal to Vishnu. She is only a self or a soul, but as the consort of Vishnu, she could not be away from him. She's always with him at any time. This concept appears to go against the Pancharatra tradition, right? Which makes both Shri and Vishnu as Brahman, right? So this is objected to by the Vadagalais, and they say that both Shri and Vishnu together are the Divya Dampatis, they're the eternal couple. We already talked about the slight difference in the understanding between the Vadagalais and Tengalais. The author cites here a passage from the Ahirbunya Samhita. The Pancharatra texts declare that Shri acts in his direction, meaning Supreme Lords. And so this Acharya has authority for treating Shri as a subordinate to Vishnu. As a subordinate. Right, a subordinate cannot have equal status to the master. Vishnu is the master, and so Shri must be only a self or a soul, ever with him as his wife, as his consort. The approach made here by this author differs from the one made by others, for example, Vedanta Deshika and the Vadagalaya Acharyas, who emphasize more the role of Shri. So the role which others, the role of Shri plays as wife and mother, explains this attitude, and the dispute over this between the two Vaishnava sects is meaningless, basically, because it's just looking from two different angles at the same thing. So then the brother of Pillai Lokacharya, the younger brother, right, Alagya Manavala Peramal Nayanar, the younger brother of Pillai Lokacharya, wrote a book called Acharya Hridayam in 4 sections. The import of the Nalayar Divya Prabandham, the 4,000 songs of the Alwas, particularly the 1,100 and so magnum opus of Namalwa called Tiruvai Moli, is conveyed in this work, and hence the title. Some sets of 10 slokas or prabandhas in the Tiruvai Moli breathe a sense of bridal mysticism. So Namalwar in the Tiruvai Moli, in some portions, he expresses his love for God as though he were God's consort, female consort. This is called bridal mysticism, or Nayaki Bhava, or Nayika Bhava, or Nayaki Bhava, right? This author chooses to make a classification of these decades according to the forms of the Lord as Vyuha, Vibhava, Para, Antaryamin, and Archa. These are the 5 forms of God that we know from Pancharatra. So attract the bride and make her send him her message, right? So she is trying to send her message to God through these different forms. The doctrine of property is dealt with in another book called Paranda Rahasya. Rahasya means secret, and Paranda, I'm not sure what it means, of Jnanadika, also known as Nayanarachan Pillai, son of Perivachan Pillai, approximately 1300 AD. Pillai Lokacharya, his younger brother, and Nayanarachan Pillai, wrote the works mentioned above in Sanskritized Tamil, which is called Manipavala. It's a mixture of Tamil and Sanskrit. That is, Tamil with a large admixture of Sanskrit words. The influence of the Pancharatra Agama is felt in the works of the above-mentioned writers and also in those of the latter ones. The Astakshara mantra, Om Namo Narayana, with 8 letters, is enjoined by the Agamas. The Dwadasakshara, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, which is of great importance for the Vaikanasa tradition, is also recognized to have as much importance in the Vaishnava tradition. Instead of the Dwaya mantra and Charma sloka, instead, the Dwadasakshara mantra, which is great importance for the Vaikanasa tradition, is not recognized to have as much importance in the Vaishnava tradition, but it has in the Pancharatra tradition. Instead, the Dwaya mantra and the Charma sloka, right, which we talked about before, have received greater attention. The Charma sloka of Lord Krishna, which forms part of the Bhagavad Gita, has been raised to the level of a mantra on the strength of the assurance that God has given there for security and protection to the suffering of humanity. The path of self-surrender, which gets special attention in the Lakshmi Tantra and the Ahibudna Samhita, has exerted a profound influence on the Vaishnava alwars. Therefore, the Dwaya mantra acquired a special status for resorting to property. Naturally, Pillai Lokacharya's works, like the Tattvatraya, Mumukshapadi, Srivachanabhushana, Yadrichikapadi, Parandapadi, Shriyapatipadi, Tattvashekara, Tani Dvayam, Tani Charama, and Tani Pranava discuss the nature of the 3 rahasyas, secret doctrines. These works also discuss the nature of God and man for elucidating the full import of these, along with the Sarasangraha, Samsara Samrajya, Navaratnamalai, Navavida Sambandha, and others. These enjoin on Prapanas a way of life that would be in consonance with the esoteric import of these mantras. Another noteworthy feature is that these are all written in Tamil mixed with Sanskrit for easy comprehension of one and all, meaning Mani Pravala. So the Nayanadhyumani, right, of Megandari, Meghanadari, a contemporary of Pillai Lokacharya, represents Narayana and his Sri Bhu and Neela and his Sri Bhu and Neela consorts, right, as the ultimate reality. Sri is only a self, is only a soul, but as the beloved wife of Narayana is ever present with him. She is the mediatrix, or the Purushakara, the mediator before him on behalf of the selves. It is strange to note that the author refers to bhakti as the only means of moksha and does not treat with property. So that's interesting. Right. Vedanta Deshika, 1268 to 1369, made a significant contribution to through his Pancharatra Raksha to vindicate the authority of the Pancharatra Agama. And we have a playlist of classes on Pancharatra Raksha, right? The class is given by Dr. Tirunarayanan of Sri Rangam, right, on the Vaishnava Dharma International YouTube channel here. So you can look for that. Of the 3 sections which this work contains, the first discusses the validity of Pancharatra Agama at all possible levels and sources, including the Agama Pramanya of Yamunacharya. The conflicting views which the Samhitas contain about the nature of the 4 divisions of Agama, remember Agama Siddhanta, Mantra Siddhanta, Tantra Siddhanta, and Tantrantra Siddhanta, are resolved without injustice to the authority of the texts which discuss them. So Vedanta Deshika has done us a service by explaining these 4 different divisions of the Agamas and explaining how that they all are can be coherent together. So actual recriminations found in the Vaikanasa and Pancharatra texts are shown to be merely apparent and to have no inconsistency whatsoever. His arguments in this context represent an edifice built upon a strong foundations laid by Yamuna in his Agama Pramanya. The second section is devoted to the daily practices which a Vaishnava is to undertake. Again, these are more modeled off the Nityanikam or the Nityam of Ramanuja and the Panchakala Kriya, which we discussed, which is mentioned in Pancharatra Agamas. These must conform to the Panchakala Prakriya laid down in the Pancharatra Agamas. The Samhitas do not give a uniform account of the routine of daily life. There are slight variations in their versions. Besides, the Agama tradition lays stress on the importance of the Dwadasakshara mantra, right? So here from Shandilya Smriti, number 2, he's given a quote to show that. Some Samhitas enjoin Vishnu Gayatri for japa in the morning, Sandhya and morning Sandhya, and Dwadasakshara in the midday, and Astakshara in the evening. Vedanta Deshika notes that, in principle, the Panchakala concept should be followed, and there is no need to give up one's practice, which is based on the Kalpa Sutra, of which one is a follower. So he also brings in the idea that the Vedic or the Brahminical activities and lifestyle that one is following can also be incorporated with the Vaishnava Panchakala Kriyas. Okay, so here's an excerpt from Pancharatra Raksha, page 110. The third section is intended by the author to be an exposition of the Nitya. Remember, one of 9 works of Ramanuja is called the Nitya Grantha, which is an Anika, or a book of daily practice for his followers. With great sanctity, he supplies several links to make the text of the Nitya intelligible, because the Nitya is very concise, and so it needs a lot of explanation. So the intricate details of the morning routine are analyzed and studied in the light of various texts, especially of the Pancharatra kind, and conclusions are drawn in the most convincing way with a dispassionate scholar would not fail to appreciate. So, wearing of the Urdhva Pundra, their number, the materials for them, their form, the kinds of rosary seeds to perform japa, the nature of prostrations, both astangam and panchangam, right, normally done by ladies and men and ladies, right, and the lapses from which one should be carefully guard oneself are discussed with amazing thoroughness. The variety of flowers to be culled for worshipping God, as well as yoga, which consists of deep meditation, is explained, following the Pancharatra Samhitas. Among the Pancharatra Samhitas cited by the author, again, Vedanta Deshika, the following are well known: Paushkara, Parameshvara, Jayakya, Padma, and Satvada. The Kalotara, Hayagriva, Sankarshana, Shrikara, and Parameshya are among the less known but important ones. So then, again, Vedanta Deshika, in his Nyaya Parishuddhi, the author discusses the validity of the Pancharatra. Vedanta Deshika is the earliest writer to take up the Vaikhanasa Agama and discuss its validity also. So those who adopt Vaikhanasa Sutra exclusively do not deserve condemnation, for the same should be said of others who follow their own sutras. They have been studying the Vedas and following the religious practices sanctioned by their Kalpa Sutra, and so are not at all inferior to other Brahmins. Right, that the Ashramedha Parvan of the Mahabharata declares them to be as valid as the Pancharatra is sufficient ground for according recognition, that is, of the Vaikhanasans. Worth noting in this context are the humorous remarks which the author offers as the mutual accusations in the 2 Agamas. There are recriminatory passages. These recriminatory passages must have been interpolated by those who were intolerant of the greatness of the other system and who were eager to enjoy the slander thrown at the other system as much as eating sugarcane. Alternatively, these must be treated as artavad, or eulogistic in praise of their own system. In other words, what Vedanta Deshika is saying, that we read some criticisms in the Pancharatra or Vaikhanasa and vice versa in the Vaikhanasa or Pancharatra, but we should think of these as only being hyperbole that the people who are criticizing the other system are simply trying to make their system look better, which is fine. So here's a quote also from NP, which is Nyaya Parishuddhi. Okay, by Vedanta Deshika. So the material treated in the Pancharatra Agama provided a fresh ground for Vedanta Deshika to contribute to the maintenance of the Vaishnava ideals. The author wrote for his purpose the Sacharita Raksha in 3 sections, apart from the 5-fold daily routine on which the Pancharatra texts concentrate. The person who likes or is expected to worship God is required, according to the rules of his Agama, to have Panchasamskara. Among the 5 sacraments, marking of the shoulders of the disciple by the preceptor with the heated symbols of conch and discus was assailed by the exponents of other schools of thought on the ground that this amounts to doing injury to another and has no authority to support it. While upholding the authoritativeness of the practice, the author prefaces his arguments with proving the Pancharatra Agama as valid. This sacrament cannot be questioned because the Agama enjoins it. Then he writes an unusually large number of passages from various Vedic texts, Dharma Shastra texts, and Puranas to prove the obligatory nature of this sacrament, corroborating his statements by citing passages from this Agama. Wearing the Urdhva Pundra is the mark of a Vaishnava. The Pancharatra texts enjoin its wearing. Here, too, Vedic texts, Dharma Shastras, and Puranas are utilized to support this practice. Relevant passages and Pancharatra Agama texts are additional evidence given in the 2nd section. In the 3rd section, he deals with the obligatory sacrament of worship, namely offering food preparations to God. The question of taking nirmalya, right, the prasada or the leftovers or shesha of the deity, is discussed, and the objection to its acceptance is overruled by citing passages from the Puranas and Pancharatra texts. The following samhitas are cited in all 3 sections: Paushkara, Parameshwara, Jayakya, Padma, Satvara, Ishvara, Ahibudnya, Kalotara, Sanat Kumara, Parameshya, and Padmodbhava. The Atri Samhita of the Vaikhanasa is also cited. The doctrine of self-surrender, which is treated in the Pancharatra text, came to be recognized as an independent means of moksha in the period of Ramanuja as a result of the influence of the compositions of the Alvars, which gave prominence to this doctrine. Though it is treated in Gajatraya of Ramanuja, it took some more time to get expounded on strong grounds. Vedanta Deshika took up this matter and treated it in his book Nikshep Raksha. The prima facie view is first stated, dealing with the status to this as a means of moksha. Then denying a status of property, right? The status of property as a means to moksha. The grounds for holding this view are as follows. The nature of property cannot be defined, nor does it have any necessary appropriateness. The definition, even if it is given, cannot be precise. There is no Vedic injunction enjoining it. It is possible to deny it the status which is sought to be attributed to it. It does not differ from bhakti, which has a status as the means of moksha. It is inefficient to act as such means. Finally, it is not widely known as being the means. Right? So these are all arguments against property. The author takes up all these points and refutes them one by one. Then he shows that property could be declared to possess all those features which are sought to be denied. He concludes that the non-acceptance of property would go against the tradition, which is evidenced in ancient texts like the Ramayana, which contain illustrations of the practice of property. Passages are cited mostly from the Ahibudnya Samhita and Lakshmi Tantra in support of property, and to some extent from the Satyaki Tantra and Satvara Samhita. All the possible conflicting views on the place of Shri in Vaishnavism are discussed by the author in his commentary to the Chatusloki, remember by Yamunacharya, the four slokas on Sri Devi. In the main, there are 2 views. According to one, of which Shri is all pervasive, while according to the other, she is atomic in size, like other jivas. There are 4 subgroups under the former. They are that 1, Shri is only a self. 2, she is distinct from the selves and God. 3, she has the status of a goddess, but is not the ultimate goddess, as Narayana is the ultimate God. And 4, she is actually the goddess ruling over others. This last mentioned view is held by the author, that is Vedanta Deshika. The second main view holds that Shri is only a self, though she is the wife of Narayana. The author criticizes the other's views. So he criticizes the Tengalai views, right? And maintains the fourth one under the first main view. That property is a means like karma, jnana, and bhakti is to be admitted. And in Kali Yuga, though bhakti is not denied, its place is discussed by the author in his commentaries on Ramanuja's Gadyatraya and Yamuna's Stotra Ratna. He cites from a number of Pancharatra texts such as Sattvada Parama Sankarshana, Jayakya Vishvaksena Ahibudnya, Aushkara Ishvara, Vishnu Tattva, and Sanat Kumara Samhitas and Lakshmi Tantra and others. The name Rahasya Raksha, given by the author to his commentaries on Yamunacharya's Chatusloki on Goddess Shri and Stotra Ratna on the Supreme Lord Srimanarayana, and on Ramanuja's Gadyatraya is evidence for his treating these works as having relevance to and forming the basis for the 3 mantras and their esoteric significance. He discusses the validity of Pancharatra in the Adhikarana Sharavali. Also, that's another book by Vedanta Deshika. Also, Shandilya's statement that he got enlightenment through the Pancharatra is intended to prove that it is praiseworthy and is not meant to insult the Vedas. The Lord condensed the teachings of the Vedas, and out of compassion for people, he composed the Pancharatra Agama. Like the classification of Shruti and Smriti, the author made a division of Vaidika and Tantrika. The Pancharatra is valid like the Vishnu Smriti, which upholds Vedic practices. The Griha ceremonials are treated differently by different writers, yet the Griha Sutras are admitted to be based on the Vedas. Similarly, the practices which are enjoined on the basis of the Ekayana recension of the Vedas, right, when the Vedas were all one, right, differ from those enjoined in other Dharma Shastras texts, but yet have their foundations based on Vedic teachings. Varadanatha, son of Vedanta Deshika, wrote the Adhikarana Chintamani, a commentary on Adhikarana Sharavali on this line. So here's a quotation from it. He cites a stanza or a sloka of Sri Vishnu Chitta, right? The preceptor of Nadadur Ammal. Remember who Nadadur Ammal was? Vatsavaradacharya. He was the uncle of Vedanta Deshika. I think paternal uncle or maternal uncle, I'm not sure. And here he's saying that there's somebody called Vishnu Chitta who was a preceptor or the guru of Nadadur Ammal, and explains thus Smriti is based on Shruti, and so is Vedic. And yet there's a division of the sacred literature into Shruti and Smriti. Similarly, the Agama or Tantra is based on the Vedas, and so is Vedic. And yet there's a division maintained between Vedic and Tantric or Agamic. Arguments of a similar kind are restated by Vedanta Deshika in his Tattva Mukta Kalapa and Sarvartha Siddhi, his commentary on it. So all of these books are available in summary form by Dr. S.M.S. Chari, and we can go through some of them in English if people are interested in these different things. We can just get in touch with me. So on Sloka 122 of the Buddhisara, a selection of this work, he remarks that on the evidence of the Mahabharata, Manu and others admitted the validity of the Pancharatra, which is adopted as an authority on matters that are undisputed, though not admitted by some others. This does not lead to the declaration of its invalidity. The same principle applies to the Vedas. The Ekayana Shaka of the Vedas, right, recension, right, which was studied like the Vedas, is now extinct. because only a very limited number of persons took to its study, as in the case of the Upanishads. And here's a quotation for that. The author's Rahasya Trayasara, Rahasya, I think it's Rahasya Trayasara, yeah, is an authentic document of the tradition of property. That is, in fact, the magnum opus on the Rahasya Granthas, on the meaning of the three mantras by Vedanta Deshika. Also available in English. If anybody wants, they can text or email me. Setting forth the views held by the subgroups of Vaishnavism, analyzing them and offering his own comments on them. The doctrine of property is explained in 5 chapters. Although property is held to be a means in it by itself, it does not mean that bhakti ceases to be a means. Unlike the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas, who basically say bhakti yoga is not a means, only property is the means. So this is another slight difference between the Vadagalais and Tengalais. Even though the Vadagalais say bhakti is also a means to moksha, they don't practice it. They only practice property. So he argues that property should be adopted by every self. The Charama Sloka of Bhagavad Gita and the Dvaya Mantram are definite evidence to recognize this. The passage that God is the refuge of all and is their well-wisher shows that all are qualified to adopt this, in other words, property. The nature of property is characterized by the faith that the Lord will surely protect the self when it makes a request to him for the purpose. He refers to the views of Pillai Lokacharya on the scope of Arthapanchika and criticizes them, right? Because remember that Pillai Lokacharya and the Tengalai Acharyas, the Southern Sri Vaishnava Acharyas, have said that there is no need to make a request for surrender, for being saved. But Vedanta Deshika says there should be. You should do that. So in the opinion of the author, Ramanuja explained property, that means Vedanta Deshika, as a constituent of bhakti in the Sri Bhashya, and also as an independent means in the Gadya Traya. The unique nature of property is dealt with in 2 chapters. 7 are devoted to explain the way of life which a prapana is required to lead. This is in Rahasya Trayasaram of Vedanta Deshika. This work is written in Tamil mixed up with Sanskrit, Manipravala. So, of similar import, but smaller in size, are several other works by the same author, also written in Tamil mixed with Sanskrit, Manipravala. They are each called Rahasya, right? And in fact, these are called the Chilarai Rahasyangal, right? He hasn't mentioned that here. One with the word Padavi added to it, another with Navanita, and the other with Matrika, Sandesha, Ratnavali, and Chulaka. And we have a playlist for all these Chilarai Rahasyangals, right? Explained by Dr. Tirunarayan on this YouTube channel. You have to look for them. So we have Padavi Rahasya, Navanita Rahasya, Matrikam Rahasya, Sandesha Rahasya, Ratnavali Sahasya, Chulaka Rahasya. All of them deal with the 3 mantras presented in various ways to suit the powers of understanding of people. Among them, the Rahasya Sandesh, right, has a commentary by the author himself called Rahasya Sandesh Vivarna on property. The Rahasya Ratnavali, with its commentary, Hridaya, called Hridaya, right, discusses the Arthapanchika, right, again, which is a book of Pillai Lokacharya, but the Arthapanchika are those five subjects, property, and the life of the prapana. There's another set of works, each called Tattva, one with the word Padavi, so Tattva Padavi added to it, right? Another with Navanita, Tattva Navanita, right? So another with Matrika, Tattva Matrika, and Tattva Sandesha, Tattva Ratnavali, Tattva Chulaka. So these are all Tattva works. They discuss the nature of the ultimate reality, the self, and the world. The ultimate reality is studied in all its 5 forms. Among them, the Tattva Traya Chulaka discusses these topics in greater detail than the others, while treating of the nature of Ishvara or God, Sriman Narayana, right? Mention is made of the Vishaka Yupa, the number of the Vishaka Yupa, the number of Vibhava forms as 36. Remember, we had other Pancharatra Samhitas which talked about 36 Vibhava forms, and we also had 39 Vibhava forms mentioned, and we had different numbers. and pure and impure in creations. Among his other works, meaning Vedanta Deshika, written in Sanskritized Tamil Manipravala, the Paramata Bhanga, right, which we also started a YouTube series on, Paramata Bhanga, which is called Indian Philosophical Systems. It has been summarized again by Dr. S.M.S. Chari, and so people can look for that on this channel, right? Contains arguments intended to refute the claims of various systems of thought and for defending the Vaishnava system from attacks of other schools. Section 21 states that the prima facie view states the prima facie views against the Pancharatra doctrines. And the next section is devoted to the establishment of the Vaishnava tradition, which includes that of the Pancharatra system. So he has dealt with the Pancharatra school, which is actually a separate school from Sri Vaishnavism, but has said that it is accepted in toto, wholly, by Sri Vaishnavism. So it's another school, but it's also accepted fully. Right. In order to uphold the doctrine of property, the author composed the Abhaya Pradhana Sara, which offers a clear exposition of the doctrine of property based on well-known sloka in the Ramayana. That is, Sakrideva Prapannaya, Tavasmiti Chayachite, Abhayam Sarvabhutebhyo, Dadam Yetad Pratam Mama, which is the Ramacharma sloka, which comes in the Yudhakanda of Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana. It has got to do with the Sharanagati of Vibhishana, when Ravana's brother surrenders to Lord Rama. So actually, according to Sri Vaishnavas, Valmiki Ramayana is considered to be Sharanagati Shastra. It's full of surrender, full of different examples of surrender. So the three Rahasyas are discussed in the Samsara. It's a book called Samsara. How a Prapana should live here so as to be of service to God, and his devotees are treated in another book called Pradhana Shataka and the Sar Sangraha. Passages are cited from the epics, Puranas, compositions of the Alwars, and Agama texts like Aryabhuta Samhita, Lakshmi Tantra, Satvara Samhita, and others. The path of property and the three Rahasyas are also treated by the author in the form of verses composed in Tamil, right? So not in Manipravala, not mixed Tamil and Sanskrit, not in pure Sanskrit, but directly in Tamil. The former is dealt with in a book called Adai Kalapatu, the works with the word Churuka added to the name of each. The Artha Panchika deals with that topic. The way of wearing the 12 Udva Pundras, which is enjoined in the Agamas, is explained in the Panirunnamam, right? Which means in Tamil the 12 names, right? But it refers to the 12 mantras that are used and the forms that are meditated on when putting on the Udva Pundram. The routine of daily life is dealt with in the Sri Vaishnava Dinachari, right? So that's another book. Vedanta Deshika's zeal in preaching Vaishnavism to humanity according to the varying abilities of people is well reflected in his attempt to produce Sanskrit poems, dramas, and stotras incorporating the fundamental doctrines of the system. The poem, so he wrote a poem called Yadava Budaya, right, depicts in poetic fashion the Sadgunya, or the six main qualities, and the view of the Lord, and the viewers, and also a property. Then he wrote a full drama or a full play called Sankalpa Suryodaya, right? Contains a discussion of the validity of Pancharatra also. Among his innumerable stotras, right, or hymns of praise, the Lord with Shri is mentioned as the ultimate reality and the source of letters. The Vyuha and Sadgunya gets glorious descriptions. The basis of the nature of property are explained together with an appeal to God for the security of the self or the soul. There is an interesting reference in the Sharanagati Dipika, right, to both the agamic modes of worship, right, where the author does not discriminate one from the other to the point of superiority, on which matter the adherents of both of the schools have been vying with each other in recrimination. So two different Sharanagati Dipika talking about the agamic modes of worship. It may refer to different agamic modes of worship, like in the house or the temple. I'm not sure. Some of the slokas convey the sense of the yantras for the deities concerned. Sudarshana gets an independent hymn called the Sudarshanastika. So Vedanta Deshika has written this Jaya Jaya Sri Sudarshana, Jaya Jaya Sri Sudarshana mantra, stotra, astakam, and in 8 verses. Now, later on, that's about Vedanta Deshika and his work. So you can see he is comprehensively covered the subjects, all these subjects in Sanskrit, Manipavala, and in Tamil. Manavala Mahamuni, also known as Varavara Muni, 1371 to 1444 AD, was a great acharya who worked with a missionary zeal for propagating the doctrines of Vaishnavism. And he comes in the Tengalai Acharya Parampara, following in the footsteps and offering commentaries on the works of Pillai Lokacharya and his brother Perumal Nayana, right? So he wrote mostly in Tamil with an admixture of Sanskrit, in other words, Manipavala. In this, he was prompted by a keen desire to carry the message of the acharyas to the ordinary people who could not be expected to have even the working knowledge of Sanskrit. Yet, the Tamil words of Sanskrit origin are not foreign to the Tamil-speaking community. So he chose to adopt Manipavala way of writing. A study of his works reveals that he was well-versed in the advanced texts of Vaishnavism. And to his credit goes the distinction for having used this way of writing and achieved success in his mission. In this respect, he was veritably the illustrious follower of his acharyas. Apart from the rich storehouse of inheritance of Sanskrit and Tamil, which he availed himself of, mention must be made of the references made by him to the Pancharatra sources, which are available from his index to the Jnanasara of Arulala Perumal Emperamannar, right? And the commentaries on Acharya Hridaya, right, of Alagiya Manavala Perumal Nayana, remember, the younger brother of Pillai Lokacharya, and the 3 principal rahasyas of Pillai Lokacharya, the 3 principal rahasyas being, out of his 18 books of Rahasya Granthas, Pillai Lokacharya, the main ones are Mamukshapadi, Srivatsadabhushanam, and I guess we can say the Acharya Hridayam by his brother, or there might be one other Tattvatrayam or Arthapanchika. I'm not sure what he means by the 3rd principal one, because there are 18. Anyway, the Pancharatra texts are said to be 108 in number. The Ahirbudnya and the Vishwaksena Samhitas are mentioned by name and profusely cited. So Manavala Mamuni has mentioned them. While commenting on the section on God in the Tattvatraya, several passages are cited from the Vishwaksena Samhita, which is now not available. Although I believe on my shelf I do have a Vishwaksena Samhita, so I'm not sure what he means by the Vishwaksena is not available. It may be that the passages mentioned in Tattvatraya are not available in the Vishwaksena Samhita we have today. So Para Vyuha Vibhava Archa and Antaryamin forms are enumerated citing the passages from the text. While discussing the qualities of God, the Aryabhudya Samhita is cited to describe the 6 qualities, Sadgunya, right? The Vyuha deities and their possession of these in pairs, and the responsibility each taken up for the well-being of people. The same text is cited also to explain the derivation of the name Shri. Remember, we said that the word Shri, or Mahalakshmi's name, comes from can be derived from 2 different verbal roots. So, how God's power, or a Shakti, works for the upliftment of man is graphically explained. The path of surrender and its concept and significance are well brought out with the help of passages from this text and the Lakshmi Tantra. So God's descent, rather rise, pradurbhava, is of 2 kinds, main and subsidiary. The number of vibhavas is 36. Once again, they agree, everybody agrees that there are 36 vibhavas, expansions of God, which gets justification from a passage from the Vishwaksena Samhita. The author notes that this number to be 39, in the Aryabhudya Samhita. Remember, we read about that there was a discrepancy. Aryabhudya Samhita said 39 instead of 36. This discrepancy is resolved by Manavala Muni by treating the descendants of Kapila, Dattatreya, and Parashurama as cases of the subordinate kind. Subordinate kind of Vibhava avatars, meaning Shaktivesha avatars, not fully Vishnu Tattva. So thus, when these are taken out of the list becomes 36. Okay, so that's the way that Manavala Muni clears that problem. So the citations given here, as traced from the Sanat Kumar and the Jayakya Samhitas, are not traceable to the text with these names as available now. So Ranga Ramanuja, that's about Manavala Muni. Now, a lot more can be said about Manavala Muni, but I believe because Dr. Varadachari, the author of this book, is a Wadagalai, he knows more about Vedanta Deshika than Manavala Muni, who's a Tengalai Acharya. So Ranga Ramanuja, around 1600 CE, cites from the Kurma Linga and other Puranas in his Bhava Prakashika on the Shruta Prakashika. So remember, Shruta Prakashika by Sudarshana Suri is a commentary on Shribhashya, right? And Bhava Prakashika by Ranga Ramanuja Muni, right, of 1600, right, CE, right, is his commentary on the sub-commentary on Shribhashya, right? And Shribhashya, of course, is a commentary by itself on the Vedanta Sutras to support the authority of Pancharatra. So he quotes the Kurma Linga and other Puranas on that. The Tattva Martanda of Bhuka Patnam Srinivasacharya is a commentary on the Brahma Sutras in the light of Ramanuja's views. In the interpretation of the section of the Utpatya Sambhavat, right, right, which we understood was those 4 sutras in Brahma Sutras that deal with the Pancharatra and whether it's bona fide or not. Vijnana and Brahman have grammatical coordination, and so the sutra runs as Vijnanadi Bhave and not Vasudevadi Bhave. So the word Vijnana refers to Jnana, which is the first quality in the list of Sadgunas, right? Jnana, Bala, Aishwarya, Virya, Shakti, and Tejas, right? So these are the Sadgunas or the Sadgunyas. So the word Adi, right, meanings starting with Jnana, refers to Sadgunas, may be taken to stand for the material cause which Brahman is, or the Supreme Lord is. Further, Vijnana means Vasudeva and not simply a quality. Objection cannot be taken to the emergence of the self, right? Remember, so the objection was by Shankara and by another Vedavadin, Bhaskara, right? That Sankarsana was emanated from the self, or the self emanated from Sankarsana, right? So because we understand that the souls, the individual souls, are eternal, they didn't emanate from Sankarsana, who is the second of the Chaturvyuhas, right? So here, so he's saying here that objection cannot be taken about the emergence of the self from Sankarsana, right? Which Shankara and Bhaskara have said, as there is justification for this in the Upanishad itself. The aphorism, vipratishedacha, right, must mean because of the absence of opposition or rejection. The Pancharatra texts reject the birth of the self, and so their validity is not contradicted. Vipratishedat, right? Vipratishedat means not contradicted, right? The author shows also that this section cannot be taken to go against the Shaktas, right? The author must have been influenced by the arguments in the Siddhanta Ratnavali of his grandfather Venkatacharya, which normally means Vedanta Deshika. It could be somebody else, but anyway, Siddhanta Ratnavali, I believe. It could be Vedanta Deshika, Venkatacharya. Varadarya's Pancharatra Kantakodara silences the objections raised against the validity of the Agamas. The Pancharatra Raksha Hridaya of one Ramanuja, a person called Ramanuja, is an epitome of Vedanta Deshika's work mentioned in its name. In other words, the Pancharatra Raksha. So it's sort of like a commentary on Pancharatra Raksha, by a person called Ramanuja. The Agama Pradipa of Sundara Raghava places the Agama on stable grounds. So these are all mentioned in passing, these later works, which have to do with the Agamas. Kapistala Deshikacharya, who was living in Tirupati in the early years of this century, and what he means by this century is he means the 20th century, discusses the problem of its validity in the validity of the Agamas, Pancharatra Agamas, in his Sharirakadikarana Ratnamala, by expressing the Vyuha doctrine as contained in the Lakshmi Tantra and the Sanat Kumar Samhita. Some works are written on the fivefold divisions of the day, needed to lead a daily routine. Among them are the Panchakala Krishya Deepa, right, by Srinivasacharya. I think that means the Panchakala Kriya Deepa, which I have, and the Panchakala Prakashika of Tirumalai Srinivasacharya. Harita Venkatacharya, 1500 CE, Dashanirnaya, and the Arnika of Gopaladeshika, which I also have, right, 1750 AD, treat the routine of the life of a Vaishnava. So, an inquiry into the nature of the mediatrix or the mediator, Sri Devi, is undertaken by Narayana Muni in his Purushakara Mimamsa, right? Mimamsa means a discussion about the Purushakara or the mediator, right, meaning Sri Devi, which has a commentary written on it by Sri Shailesha, offering daily Sri Shailesha. This usually refers to the guru of Manavala Muni, right? So offering daily worship to God is discussed in the Pratipurusha Bhagavadaradhana Samartana, whose author is not known. Sundara Veera Raghava determines the qualification for offering worship for the sake of others in the Parartha Yajanadikara Nirvaha, right? So in other words, there is maybe some qualifications that people have to attain to perform worship for others, which means in the temple, rather than performing the worship only in the house. So Champakesh Keshacharya's Tapta Mudranka Pramana Sangraha, right, analyzes the standpoints about branding the marks of the conch and the discus on the shoulders. Property as a means, which everyone is required to adopt, is dealt with in the Nikshep Chintamani of Gopala Deshika, 1730 AD. And maybe the same Gopala Deshika that was talked about above here as the Gopala Deshika Arnikam, he put up here 1750, down here he's put 1730. So approximately that time. This practice is upheld by Srinivasa Das in his Nyasa Vidya Pariskriti and by Srinivasa in his Nyasa Vidya Vijaya. The various aspects of temple worship are dealt with in the Kriya Kairava Chandrika, Kriya of Varaha Guru. Kriya Kairava Chandrika, by the way, is one of the texts which we deal with the installation of deities in temples, according to the Padma Samhita. So it's one of the traditional accounts of prayogas made from Padma Samhita by Varaha Guru, who offers here a brief but accurate account of the Kriyas and Charya aspects of Pancharatra Agama. The 37 chapters which this work contains represent the tradition as recorded in the Padma Samhita, as I said. Of similar nature is the Pratishta Pradipa of Narasimha Vajpayan and the anonymous Utsavaha Sangraha, Diksha Vidana, and Prayasthita Sangraha. The Sudarshana Suradrama, right, of Anantacharya, known as Ananta Alwan of Mysore. Anantacharya was one of Ramanuja's. Well, this is obviously a namesake of Anantacharya, of Ananta Alwar. Ananta Alwar was the disciple of Ramanuja's who went to Tirupati and made a garden for Lord Venkateshwara there. But here we're talking about a person in Mysore, 1850, from whom Dr. Alwar is descended, and his father, the late Dr. Lakshmi Tadacharya. And we have a playlist here of Mumukshapadi by Dr. Alwar. So if people want to study under a person who is descendant of this person being mentioned here, they can. So 1850 AD is an invaluable work on the sacrament of wearing the mark of the heated conch and discus. The author quotes profusely from Vedic and Pancharatric texts and Puranas. Sri Rangacharya of Purushai, who lives at Tirupati at the beginning of this century, made a good contribution to this sacrament by his Bhagavad Dharma Darpana, which means a mirror on Bhagavad Dharma, right? And Vrajakuthara. Ala Singha Bhatta is the author of Vrajamukta Vilasa, a champu, right? Sort of a play, right? Depicting the glory of the deity at Melkote, and also describing how the diamond set crown, which is called Vaidamudi, and which is offered to the Sampakumar Sheva Pillai, the Utsava Murti of, also called Ramapriya, of Tirunarayan deity, there is offered this crown once a year, right? It's supposed to be a crown of Lord Krishna's, which Lord Krishna wore. Diamond set crown came to adorn him in that shrine. The author states 1838 AD as the date of his birth. So some minor works on Pancharatra are as follows. The Sudarshana Mimamsa, it is said to have been written by Vedacharya, the son of Vedavyasa Bhatta, and grandson, Vedavyasa Bhatta, seems to be, here is the brother of Parasara Bhatta, or the son of Kuresha, also called Srivatsanka Mishra, or Kurutalwan, one Ramanuja's main disciple, and grandson of Srivatsanka Mishra. There it says, disciple of Ramanuja. This work argues in favor of the Tapta Mudrankana, right, the branding of the symbols of Vishnu on the shoulders. Several writers' names and declarations from their works are given here by the author to support his arguments. Vishnu Chitta, Narayana Muni, Vedavyasa Bhattaraka, Yadava Prakasha, who was later to become called Govinda Jir, who was the original Gurukul teacher of Ramanuja, and Ananda Tirtha. Ananda Tirtha is usually Madhvacharya, so that's also, maybe his views are also given there, because they also do the Shankachakra branding, right? Are the writers whose views in support of this sacrament are recorded here. Reference is made to the views of Bhatta Vachaspati, who praised the Lord at Sri Rangam, Gohita, Narayanacharya's Sadachara Grantha, and Danushka Yajvan's Vedabhasya, all of them being unknown till now. The author mentions Valala as his patron. The author refers to a sloka in praise of Ramanuja and attributes it to his preceptor. This sloka forms part of the introductory slokas of the Shuddha Prakashika, commentary on Sri Bhashya, of Sudarshana Suri, son of Vedacharya. As this quotation would suggest the identification of the author as a descendant of Vardacharya. He could not have been the son of Vedavyasa Bhatta, right? There is a work with the name of Satvata Tantra in 9 chapters. It deals with the theory of creation under the influence of Shakti. The divine descents are counted as 42, right? So not 36, not 39, 42. Enumerating them according to each Manvantara, the period presided over by each Manu. Devotion is stated to be of 3 kinds, namely Nirguna Bhakti, Kamaja Bhakti, and Leela Bhakti. Vaishnavas are of 3 kinds. To the first belong those who are dear to all. Second, those who display their liking to others in a relative degree are of the second kind, and the Prakrita Vaishnavas are of the third kind, as they have love for the deities, for the icons in the temple, but maybe not for others. So moksha is obtained by reciting the name of Krishna. The entire work is in the form of a dialogue between Shiva and Narada. There are certain elements like the role of Shakti and the divine descents which show the influence of the Pancharatra tradition, or rather the Vaishnava tradition. The other features have nothing in common with the Pancharatra system except for the name. This work has affiliation only with the cult of Krishna. So there is a Shandilya Samhita, of which a part is called Bhakti Kanda alone is available. Though it treats with Diksha, Nyasa, and other topics that generally form part of the Pancharatra texts, other themes like Bhakti, Stotras, Guna Bhakti, practices in the Kali age, right, or Kali Yuga, cover the greater part of this work. There's also available a Samhita by this name. By what name? By the name of Shandilya Samhita, right? In fragments. Perhaps Shandilya, the narrator, is brought in as a narrator in the Bhakti Kanda mentioned above and offering his name to it. The tenets of the Vaikhanasa system are treated in the Vaikhanasa Sara Sangraha by Srinivasa Bhattacharya and in the Vaikhanasa Siddhanta Lesha Darsha by Krishna Bhattacharya, by Sri Krishna Bhattacharya. The Uttama Brahma Vidya Vikasha of Sundaraja Bhattacharya, right? Sundaraja Bhattacharya discusses the concepts of Brahman, the means of getting moksha, and the practice of meditation. Similar is the Mokshopaya Pradipika of Raghupati Bhattacharya. The Vaikhanasa Dhyana Muktavali of Vainatya Bhattacharya, with the commentary of Krishna Bhattacharya, is of a particular kind, as it deals with the postures of the icons or deities and the retinue of God. Installation of images gets treated in the Pratishta Vidhi Darpana of Narasimha Vajrapayan, which we mentioned before, and the Pratishtana Kramanika of Venkata Narasimhacharya. Keshavacharya's Archana Navanita and Bharadvaja Narasimhacharya's Archana Tilaka discuss the procedure of worship. Srivatsamakin, son of Timarya, is a scholar who was a priest in the temple of Tirumalai. The master of 8 languages. He wrote a commentary on the Abhigyana Shakuntala of Kalidasa and other works of Sanskrit grammatists. He also wrote the Vaikhanasa Mahima Manjari and the Vaikhanasa Sutra Tatparya Chintamani on the observances of those who belong to the Vaikhanasa Sutra. The Uttama Brahma Vidya, dealing with the means of moksha, and the Vaiyashika Brahma Sutra Vyakhana, a commentary on the Brahma Sutras according to the Vaikhanasa doctrines, which talks about a separate system of Vedanta for the Vaikhanasins called Sri Lakshmi Vishishtadvaita. One of Sundaraja's disciples, whose name is not known, offered an exposition of the principles of the system in his Vaikhanasa Tattvartha Bodhana. Alagiya Singha Bhatta, son of Yogananda Bhatta, commented upon the Sattvata Samhita in his commentary called Sattvata Tantra Bhashya. God tells Sankarsana that he must be worshipped in 3 ways, and the commentator notes that these ways concern Paravyuha and Vibhava. The commentator discusses the kinds of Vibhava of Archavatar is shown to have been included in the Vibhava. So he supports his interpretations by citing passages from the Lakshmi Tantra and commentaries on the Panchastava, which we discussed, the 5 stotras of Srivatsanka Mishra, otherwise known as Kuresh or Kurutalwan, right? And the Sri Gunaratna Kosha of Parashara Bhatta, his son. So a passage from the Lakshmi Tantra is cited to explain the concept of Vishakayupa. Besides citing other texts like the Parameshvara, the Padma Samhita is mentioned for a reference to the details regarding mantras and their relative positions. The commentator justifies a view of the Chaturatmya aspect found in the Lakshmi Tantra, but notes that this is against the view of the Sattvata Samhita. Mandala is to be considered as the body of God. To avoid the sin of taking nirmalya, the archika must keep something apart from his and other devotees' use, and then offer the offering to Vishvaksena and throw it into water after it's offered to Vishvaksena, right? While dealing with initiation, the author gives useful information citing the Jayakya and Lakshmi Tantra. So Alasingha Bhatta commented on the Ishvara Samhita in his Sattvatartha Prakashika. The commentator observes that the Sattvata Poshtara and Jayakya Samhitas are the sutras for the Ekayana Veda, also called the Mula Veda. Ishvara Parameshvara and the Lakshmi Tantra are their commentaries or vrittis. Conduct of festivals is treated in the Ishvara and the Parameshvara Samhitas. The Lakshmi Tantra does not treat this matter. So the priests in the temple at Kanchi adopt the Padma Samhita. Purusha, Satya, and Achyuta and Ananta take the place of Sankarsana and others in certain rituals, right? So at the commencement of the act of worship, Vishvaksena is to be worshipped according to Ishvara Samhita and Ganesh according to the Parameshvara and Jayakya. The commentator identifies certain practices in the text as taken from the passages dealing with them in other texts. The word anuyaga, which means taking of food, right? Yaga meaning a yagya or a sacrifice, and anuyaga means a small sacrifice. So it means the taking of food we're offering to the Vaishvaranaya fire of digestion, right? After, and God is conceived as being that fire of digestion, right? According to the Gita, Krishna says he's the fire of digestion. So the word anuyaga means taking of food after completing the worship of God, is derived as intended for the self, which is atomic in size. And here we have a verse for it. He cites Vedanta Deshika for the explanation of the word anuyaga and quotes an extract from the Paushkara Samhita about it. This is to be offered to the deity, which is meant, what is meant is that it should be offered to the deity in the house, since the mains or pitris are to be offered the food before anuyaga. In other words, when we do the Vaishvadeva Homa, the Vaishvadeva, when we do the Vaishvadeva in the house, after we do the puja and offer the food to the house deity, then we have to do the Vaishvadeva, right, and offer to the pitris and the devatas some of that food before we ourselves take it. Right. So since the mains pitris are to be offered the food before anuyaga, the commentator notes that this interpretation does not suit the context. Here, the word vinivedya must be taken to mean the offering which is to be made to God within oneself. The commentary has useful discussions like the one stated above on topics of crucial value for the tradition. Swami Naga or Nagaswamin wrote a commentary called Tattva Pradipika on the Vishnu Samhita. The commentator quotes the first stanza in the Yatiraja Saptati of Vedanta Deshika as a Mangala Sloka, right? So Mangala Sloka means the beginning of a text. There'll be a verse of praise, right? And so he's taken that from Vedanta Deshika's Yatiraja Saptati. The commentator, in brief, refers to the relevant mantras for application in the proper context indicated in the text. The commentator quotes from the Sattvata Samhita, Murari's work, and a work called Nirbandhana. He quotes also from other Agamas. The Parameshvara Samhita has a commentary called Vivriti by Nrsimha Yajvan, who we mentioned before as authoring one book on Pratishta. Right? The Lakshmi Tantra has a commentary by Krishnamacharya. In recent years, works came to be written defending the practice of the Tatra Mudra Ankana, or the branding of the symbols of Vishnu on the shoulders. Among the Vaishnavas, the rift regarding property adopted as a means gave rise to the working of smaller works in support of this and in opposition to this. And there we have there's a sort of an overview of all the other Sri Vaishnava literature, which has all got meanings from the Pancharatra Agamas and the Vaikhanasa Agamas too.
Om Namo Narayanaaya